Hi, we've made this video because we understand that cables for biosensors or screen printed electrodes can be a little complicated. So part of the complexity comes from this sort of small fact that we have electrodes that are 7 millimeters in diameter and electrodes that are 10 millimeters in diameter. So we have these different sized electrodes. We have to have cables that can essentially compensate for that fact. We also have the complexity that we have two instruments, sort of an anapot and an anapot EIS. And these two instruments, one of them requires what's called a 5-pin LEMO and the other one needs a 4-pin LEMO. So that essentially means that we have sort of two variables on two ends of the cables. The connection to the instrument can be a variable, and the connection to these screen printed electrodes or these biosensors can also be a bit of a variable because of the difference in size. Now we make all our biosensors actually the 7 millimeter type, and the reason we do that is because 7 millimeters is closest. When you ever look at a commercial biosensor like a glucose meter, a glucose strip, they are fairly small. When you compare it to something sort of that's 10 millimeters in diameter, you get a real sense that they're actually quite small. And the reason that is because these manufacturers, including people like Zimmer and Peacock, we understand that actually you need to keep things small, because when you really are manufacturing products, you want to reduce the amount of materials that are used. So let's go to the cables themselves now. So the first thing to say is that Zimmer and Peacock, we've had a history of developing cables, and at this point I would say that the best all-round selection for a cable is if you're using the anapot EIS, it needs what's called a LEMO 5-pin connector. So that's why we use LM5 there. So I would actually say if you're using an anapot EIS, use this cable and use it in conjunction with one of these connectors. Now the electrodes that we try to recommend people use are the 7 millimeter screen printed electrodes. All our biosensors are in this 7 millimeter width format. If you happen to be using a 10 millimeter screen printed electrode, then you can use that 10 millimeter cable. So for simplicity these days, we recommend, if you're using the anapot EIS, use this cable. If you're using the anapot, which is essentially the one without the electrochemical impedance spectroscopy capability, you need this LM4 cable. And again, for simplicity, I would say choose the LM4 cable here and use it in conjunction with one of these connectors, either the 7 millimeter cable or the 10 millimeter cable. If you're using our biosensors, I would use the 7 millimeter cable. When you hover on here, what you see here, there's 3 ports on the back which will take 3 millimeter banana plugs. So the way the cable works is these cables, we have crocodile clips on them, but you can pull those crocodile clips off. It'll then expose 3 millimeter banana plugs, and you can plug those 3 millimeter banana plugs into the back side of that one or the back side of that one. So in summary, the simplest cable setup to get and the most flexible is actually decide whether you're using anapot EIS or the anapot, and then decide so we can choose one of those cables accordingly. This is for the EIS one, this is for the non-EIS one, and then decide, if you're using our biosensors, then you need the 7 millimeter one, or if you're using our hyper value or value screen printed electrodes, which is the 7 millimeter type, use this connector. And if you're using our larger 10 millimeter wide electrodes, then use the 10 millimeter version. So that's the simplest setup. One cable, one connector, and then if you change sizes, you can just change the connector quite easily. Oops, I just need to go backwards. So now that's what I'm essentially recommending today. The reason I'm recommending that is we have a lot of cables. So if you're interested, if you're using one of our 7 millimeter wide biosensors, if you're not using a potentiostat from Zimmer and Peacock, then you can use this cable because it ends in a 7 millimeter connector. It has banana plugs here which are 3 millimeter, and so you can connect those to your normal potentiostat, and you can then use that to connect to our screen printed electrode or our biosensor. Some people, if you're using an ion selective electrode like a ZP, sodium, potassium, chloride, pH, ammonium, nitrate, calcium, there's probably another one that I've forgotten. Sometimes people are connecting them to instruments which have Bnc connectors. A Bnc connector looks like this. That's very standard in pH probes. At which point, if you're using one of our ion selective electrodes and you want to connect it to a more traditional pH meter, then this Bnc cable is what you need. We have, if you're you can actually get a cable that connects straight to the anapot and straight to a 7mm screen printed electrode or biosensor, so that's a cable there. Now earlier on, I think this cable has been superseded by using essentially this cable in conjunction with the 7mm connector. But traditionally we were providing this cable because it has the 4-pin LEMO that connects into the anapot, and then a connector here for the 7mm wide screen printed electrode or biosensor. If you were doing EIS measurements, then you actually need the anapot EIS cable able to connect to a 7mm screen printed electrode or biosensor. Right. Now we also have some historical cables for the 10mm screen printed electrodes. So if you're using your own potentiostat, then you will need this 3mm banana plug that ends with a 10mm connector. It's quite rare that you'd actually need to connect to a 10mm screen printed electrode using a Bnc connector, but we do have a cable for that. This cable I think has been superseded, but this one is a 5-pin LEMO connector that will connect to a 10mm screen printed electrode. I think that's been superseded by, let's just have a quick look at it, because we're talking about the that's been superseded by this cable used with either one of the connectors here. And it's a similar story here, that this is for just a normal anapot. It will connect to a 10mm screen printed electrode, but I would actually suggest that that's been superseded by this cable used in conjunction with one of these connectors here. Lastly, I think it is lastly, yeah, we just happen to have something that connects to our, not our screen printed electrodes and not our screen printed biosensors, but actually to our wire electrodes. So this is specifically for our wire electrodes. So I'll just go here, go products. I will go to biosensors. I will go to, sorry about the, and then down to wire. And essentially, if you watch this video here, you will see that we have these wire electrodes, which are really sort of intended for like transdermal type applications, and they have a different connector. So I will back up now and say, if you're looking at the electrodes on this page, to connect them to our instrument, you will require this cable here. So I'm going to finish the presentation now by saying many of our cables have actually been superseded by something that's much more simple, which is you can just this cable will connect into our anapot EIS, this cable will connect into our anapot, and they end in crocodile clips, but you can pull the crocodile clips off and you'll have 3mm banana plugs under there, and then you can connect them either to this connector, which is for 7mm wide screen printed electrodes or biosensors, or this one for the 10mm screen printed electrodes. We do accept that this is all a little confusing. If you have any questions, just contact us and you'll find us quite helpful. Okay, thanks very much.